someone handing out flyers outside as they walked in, imposing as an imposter in the Foley Institute. I just think that was very inappropriate. And I just want to ask, have you no sense of decency?
I'll tell you what, let's try to start this off on a little different note, and I'm going to let you go ahead and start. But the flyer that he's talking about, I was just made aware of, and all I want to say on it is that we do have freedom of speech. People are allowed to put forth their views, whether we agree with them or not. And it is not a university-sponsored flyer that you are handed as you came to the door, and that's all that I will say. It has nothing to do with the Foley Institute or with any of the sponsors. And so I think at this point, I would encourage you to ask the question of our two panelists, and I thank you.
Yes, thank you. And with respect, Dr. Hing, I would like you to talk a little bit more about the issues of NAFTA. The Project Gatekeeper was instituted at the same time that NAFTA was going into effect. And I would like you to talk about the relationship between those two.
I do believe that it was a coincidence. I'm not that. Because Operation Gatekeeper started as a local experiment that's how it operated for a long time. But yeah, a lot of what was out of control in NAFTA, and Hassan knows more about this than I do, had to do with the devaluation of Mexico and a couple of other economic crises that Mexico was facing at that time. So it was very bad timing that both those things happened, because all of a sudden you have a lot of a poorer group of people from Mexico that are searching for a better way of life. Many were desperate and put pressure on people to find themselves.
Next question. This gentleman back here, and then we'll come back to the front.
Ask him to speak up, too. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Stand up.
Hi, my first question, I guess it's my own question. You talked about some of the things like cause immigration or political instability in other countries. Do you have any numbers or any studies that have done that show that maybe immigration stops political change in other countries so job loss doesn't occur?
Your argument is that immigration prevents countries from making changes.
I'm not saying that's my argument. I was asking if you guys done any studies on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly that one of the arguments about immigration, especially in the case of Mexico, which is the largest sending country in the world, is that it's a safety valve for Mexico, and that were it not for immigration, Mexico would have to reform, improve their services, educational attainment, and other things for their population, and that would help Mexico develop. I don't know of any studies that have tried to really examine that. I think there's a good example in the European case, when Europe formed its union and decided that it would allow free mobility within the European Union. And the discrepancy between wages and the economy of Germany on the one hand and Portugal on the other was similar to that difference that we have between the United States and Mexico. And before they allowed for free mobility within Europe, there was a tremendous amount of European Union investment into Portugal and Spain in particular to help them develop their economies. After they did that, they opened up the borders. The number of people who moved from Portugal to Germany was surprisingly small, even though the wage differences weren't entirely eliminated by any means. And I think that in the long run, it is the case that economic development in the countries of origin will lead to a lowering of migration. It happened in the European case of the United States. It will happen in the Mexican case of the United States. But those differences, as Bill pointed out, have remained very large in Mexico's case. Were it not for immigration, would Mexico have reformed and been transformed? I'm doubtful, because we have a lot of countries that haven't had that immigration valve, that have had similar precipitously poor economic performance in relation to the United States throughout Latin America. And I don't know why we would expect Mexico to be very different from any of those other countries, but I haven't studied it exclusively. And then let me also, I'm sorry, I'm taking the floor maybe too longer than I should, but I also was handed this flyer, and I talked to you about facts and why I think facts are important in this debate. And Bill said, you know, he thought that economic arguments are often a ruse, and that maybe that's not what really people mean when they talk about immigration. I think he's right in some cases, but I think in other cases that is what people are concerned about, and that is what people are responding to, and I think it's worth responding to those issues. And so I have a set of facts I showed you, and here's a set of facts that have been presented. And you, as university students, are responsible for being analytical thinkers, and for assessing research and understanding that research and knowing where it comes from. And that's part of what you're here for. And so I can say to you that my facts come primarily from the Census Bureau, data from national surveys that are representative of the entire population. We've done other studies, for example, on prisoners in California. They come from the prison database that's maintained by the California Department of Justice on California prisoners. And they don't show some of the things that are in here. I'm not going to go through point by point here, but I note that the resources that are recommended here are anti-immigrant groups. And when you consider those resources, it's not, or when you consider their political point of view, then it's not necessarily surprising that you would end up with this kind of set of facts. This happens all the time, and I think that you need to, as consumers of this research, not necessarily believe me, or not necessarily believe these flyers, but find out where this data comes from, find out what kind of methods were used to analyze the data, find out how representative the data is, and then draw your own conclusions. And if you care about this issue enough, it's not an easy thing to do, but those are the kinds of things that you should do, because this kind of information is often put out there as fact, and of course I will tell you that what I presented was more accurate. It was, but you might not believe me. And so that's incumbent on you then to do some of your own homework.
Also a question for Mr. Johnson. During your speech, you mentioned the concept of native. And I think it's very important that we ask the concept of what is native. You ask whether or not immigrants take jobs from natives. Now, I'm sure that some jobs are taken away from natives, but Euro-Americans aren't natives. They are immigrants, and they are descendants of immigrants, but they are not native. Perhaps we could re-examine the definition of what is native and what is immigrant. Perhaps that is something that we should try.
Well, and there are all kinds of minefields that we walk into when we go from academic economic literature, in that case, to a more public forum in this case. And so in the academic economic literature that I read, when people do studies of immigration and immigrants and their effect on U.S.-born residents, which is a more accurate description, the term native is often used. And that's why I did it, and I apologize. Certainly there are Native Americans or indigenous people who would feel very strongly that that's the wrong terminology, but it's the terminology that's used in my discipline. And I usually try to be careful when I go from the academic world to a more public setting to change that, but in this case I didn't.
Thank you. Next question. This woman right here.
Thank you. I have a question for Dr. Johnson regarding the legalization of immigration. When you mentioned the dramatic increase in the population of immigration, I wonder if that includes both the legal and the illegal immigration?
Yeah, the estimates attempt to include both undocumented or illegal and legal immigration. It's known that the census undercounts immigrants, and that undocumented immigrants are more likely to be undercounted than other groups, and there are adjustments that people make in a long kind of boring accounting process, but it's important, and it's been discussed, and it's available for people who want to read about it.
So I wonder, do you have any statistics or rough numbers about the annual visa actually the government issues So like any